Tenzin Dresen Wangmo is a young Bhutanese writer who recently published her book All the Stars That Collide. This book was published this year. Through her fiction, she talks about human interest stories, highlighting social and mental health issues. And to talk more about her book, we have with us Tenzin Dresen Wangmo. Thank you for your time. To begin with, tell us about you.
Firstly, I'd like to start by thanking BBS for giving me this platform to speak. And as for my intro, my name is Tenzin Dresen Wangmo. I am currently 17 years old, studying in grade 12, taking the stream science. For my education, I studied in school till class 10. And for my higher education, I recently entered Ugin Academy for 11 and 12. I'm in my final year there right now. And I guess that's it for my intro.
And as a writer, what inspires you to write?
I can't really talk about what inspires me because that talks about the present. And right now, as I'm not really working on any project, I can't really talk about what inspires me. But other authors inspire me to write on a daily basis, I guess. Seeing their work out, seeing them speak about their issues and what they think about inspires me to write.
And who are your favorite authors, international or local?
For local authors, I of course love Madam Tenzin Wangmo. I read her book La Ama again recently and it's so wonderful. I love Pema Yudin's Coming Home. And for international authors, I have so many. I love J.K. Rowling, J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, all of their fantasy books. I grew up on them as a child. And then thriller books by Stephen Hawking, definitely. And Jennifer Niven, John Green are some of my favorite all-time authors.
And as I was going through your book, I noticed that you have quoted John Green a lot. So tell us what is so fascinating about his works?
John Green has a way of stringing words together that's so beautiful, actually. I remember one of his quotes from, I think it was The Fault in Our Stars, and he said, "My thoughts are stars I cannot fathom into constellations." I just love the way he said that, and it's so beautiful, his writing itself.
You published your debut novel, All the Stars That Collide, this year. What inspired you to write and publish this book?
Firstly, it was just a singular story, a short story about a girl called Eva Kensidorji and her adventure in the greatest city of the world. And it stayed like that, just a short story in my mom's laptop for a couple of months before I went back to my mom's laptop and just saw that story lying there. And then I wrote a second and a third chapter, and my parents saw it and they sort of loved it. And after that, an idea just sort of formed in my head about writing about all the problems that youth my age go through, youth in Bhutan go through. And I wanted to advocate those problems. Yeah.
And tell us about the process of writing. How long did it take to write and publish?
I started, I think, last year at the beginning of quarantine. The first quarantine in March, I think. Was it April or March? Yeah, I started during that time. And I experienced many writer's blocks in the process of it because I wrote the first 8 chapters without any block, any obstacle. And then after the 8th chapter, I sort of had a hard time stringing a proper story. The idea was there and what I wanted to write in the chapter was there, but I didn't know how to characterize them and how to make a story out of it.
And what is the title of your book means, All the Stars That Collide?
This title, it has a lot of story behind it. So I read this research, I think it was by Columbia University or Harvard University, on astronomy, and it said that there were approximately 10 to the power 22 stars in this world, 10 to the power 22 stars in this universe. And each star has a unique spectrum that makes it completely unique to any other star in this universe. So I thought, those stars were sort of like people and sort of like the characters in my book. And all of my characters, they sort of have these collisions, I guess, with each other in which their fates sort of intertwine. And yeah, that's why I guess All the Stars That Collide.
Tell us briefly about the entire book, briefly.
The book, All the Stars That Collide, is about 13 different lives, all youth, all my age, approximately. And all these lives are sort of going through something. They're constantly fighting a battle against their lives, basically. There's depression, suicide, anxiety, and all these youth, they sort of find comfort in each other, and they sort of meet each other along the way, and them meeting with each other sort of causes a ripple effect in their lives. And it sort of advocates how even small lives, even lives you think you don't matter, that don't matter, like make a huge impact in other people's lives.
So, as a writer, tell us why should someone read this book?
I think people should read this book so they don't feel alone, because my story advocates on so many things, and I hope that people, through reading my book, sort of realize that there's always someone that understands them, because there are all sorts of people out there in the world. There are homosexuals, there are heterosexuals, then there's people who have anxiety, who have eating disorders, and my book sort of highlights on all of that, and I hope that they realize that they're not alone after reading that.
Right, and I went through some of the chapters from your book, and then I noticed that you talk about mental health issues as well, which is a growing concern among the youth in Bhutan right now. So there's suicide as well, which is increasing actually at an alarming rate. So as a writer, tell us, why is it important to talk about these issues through literature or art?
Because if we talk about these issues in any other way, they sort of become like this huge tragedy. People only see it as a huge misfortune, and you're immediately labeled. Like the moment people say, like if I say that I'm depressed, I become labeled as a depressed person clinically. And then if I say I have an eating disorder, that means there's something wrong with me. But I think if we talk about it through literature, through art, we can express it in a way that people can judge it without judging someone else. So, yeah.
So in one of your chapters, you talk entirely about suicide, where the protagonist loses her friend to suicide. So what would be your advice for your readers?
That chapter on suicide is very personal for me, because as a youth of this age, I am constantly surrounded by people who do have depression, who do have anxiety, and it is hard to see your friends go through things like that, because after being with them, my friend, the particular person that I wrote this chapter for, she's been suffering from depression and anxiety for a very long time, and hearing her talk about it is very painful for me, because for her every day is a battle. She doesn't want to get up in the morning, she doesn't want to do anything, and for her doing day-to-day things that we take for granted is so difficult for her. And yeah, basically I want the youth out there to know that there's always someone who's willing to listen, and there's always someone that they can reach out to. And even if it's not their parents or their teachers, there are teenagers just like them who are willing to help them, who have been through the same things, and who will help them basically to get through it.
So do you kind of derive your characters from your real life experience or the people you meet for your book?
Definitely I do. Like, none of these characters are completely made up in my mind. They are people that I have met, stories that I have heard, especially that one about Rigden. The story about Rigden. He's classified as this perfect boy, and his story is definitely something that I've heard about, because Asian parents do tend to, Bhutanese parents actually also, do tend to put a lot of pressure on their kids to be perfect. They want to produce doctors or engineers, and it's so hard to live up to that sometimes, and I want to talk about what arises from that, from all that pressure that you put on the child.
And I also noticed that you have very mature characters in your book. You are just 17 right now, so how do you form those characters?
I build a character with a certain characteristic in mind because all my stories are short stories, so it's very easy to make a character. And so I usually set out with a certain characteristic and a certain story I want for him or her, and I build my character around that. And the reason that they have such mature and I guess mature thoughts about depression or death and life itself is because the youth of today is so different from the youth of before, right? Because we face different problems. If the youth of the past, they had like a hard time going to school, they had to walk 2 hours, and all of their pain was very physical. But the youth of today go through a much more emotional pain. They go through mental pain, and that's why I guess the youth of all my characters, because they're based on real life characters that I know, that I have met, I guess that's why they have such mature feelings.
And I'm sure you might have got some feedback from your friends of your age, from your friends, relatives, and all. So, as a writer, what was that one feedback that was close to your heart, maybe?
I remember my friend, one of my friends in UA, she actually came to me with tears in her eyes, and she told me that she loved one of the characters, one of the male characters. I think it was, I don't really remember, but he wasn't a protagonist of any of the stories. Oh yeah, it was Chatzel. And he wasn't really a protagonist of any of the stories, but she said that she loved the fact that as a man, he understood what it felt like to be a woman of this century and what it felt like to be molested. And it was so nice that even through character, she could see a Bhutanese male basically standing up for women's rights.
You also talk about sexual abuse in your book. Did you have any intentions while writing that story? Maybe any like positive message for the society?
I honestly hate how normalized sexual abuse is these days, because rape is becoming too normal a word to use, and we can't just allow it to happen. And especially in eastern sides of Bhutan, we can see that my older sister, she told me that in her village, men would force their way into her bed, and that was totally normal in their village. And we shouldn't just accept things like that. It is the 21st century, and as a global citizen, as a citizen of Bhutan, as a woman, we should strive to make a change to help people.
Can you read out one of your favorite lines from the book?
It is from 255. It is towards the end of my book. These stories, if we read only one, do not seem all that special. It's just people living their lives. But if we take enough steps further back to see every story, it turns out to be much more of a miracle. That's what life truly is. Everything that's happening in our life is not a coincidence. Our lives are affected by the conscious and subconscious decisions made by the millions of other lives that exist in the universe. If only we took a moment to observe, to let it all catch up, we would see that darkness holds as much beauty as light, that we are part of befores and afters, that our lives and the memories we make in this life are infinite, that we are infinite. Our lives are like poetries, songs, and paintings. None are the same, but that does not undermine the unique complexity of the other. We are not background characters or a presence to fill the empty spaces. Our lives resonate into cosmic moments that ripple through time. Nothing truly ends. It is always relative. Most endings are just beginnings. Whenever hope feels lost, come back to yourself and remember where it begins. Our lives are our own to make and to change.
And you have about 13 characters in your book. So do you have a favorite, and why?
The chapter about suicide, about Karsal, I absolutely loved writing that chapter because of how personal it was to me, and it was very emotional to write that chapter, but it was also fun to express myself, because it is hard to express myself other times, and because I'm always so busy as well, school and other activities always going on, I don't really get the time. And when I could express my thoughts about how I felt about the situations and about mental health, about depression into that one chapter. It felt sort of relieving for me.
And I read that chapter actually, and then I felt that you were highlighting more about the person who dies. They are gone, right? But it's the people who are left behind who suffers mentally and physically. So were you in a way try to convey that the side effects, the impact of suicide to the family and friends?
Yeah, actually, because there was a John Green quote again, I guess, that said, "Funerals are not for the dead; they're for the living." And that quote sort of resonates into what you said right now, because when a person suicides, they just sort of disappear, right? They go into the afterlife or heaven or whatever. But there are people who are left behind here who were a part of their lives, subconsciously or consciously, who will always be affected by the choice that they made. Because suicide is not a pretty death. It is not something that, it is something that we had control over in a way, right? Because suicide meant that she made a choice to kill herself, he made a choice to kill himself, and that means that we all played a factor into his decision making, his or her decision making, and that fact will always stay with somebody, and the guilt sort of eats away at you because you couldn't help that person. And I think that any person who is depressed also needs to realize that there are people who surround him who he might not think, who he or she, like, they might not think that they're important right now, but right after they leave, these people, they suffer from the consequences of his decisions.
And as a youth and as a teenager right now, and as a writer, what are your general observation when it comes to mental health issues in the country?
First of all, I feel that it's not acknowledged enough in our country. Mental health is such a growing issue, and it's mainly because of pressures on studies and then broken families, abusive fathers, abusive mothers, abusive parents in general. And all these, they keep on rising, the levels. And the amount of depressed cases we know, that's only the ones who chose to speak out. So we never know about the ones who don't speak out, who chose to stay silent, who choose to just suffer through it silently. And I know that I know a numerous amount of friends who study, who face pressure from studies, who constantly feel that they're not doing enough, who think that they have to get into the first 20 slots of MBBS, who think they have to get into engineering. They think that their life is over if they don't get into one of those things. But that's not it, right? Life is worth so much more than that. You're not really defined by what you do, your job, what you take in college, but the mentality has become that we are that we are just what we study. And I think that needs to change. And I think that in schools, in institutions, everywhere, there should be certified counselors, certified psychotherapists, so that students who face trauma, they can all find sort of a solace, a sort of a way to speak to somebody without being judged.
Right, and I think it's just my personal observation actually. I feel that most of us actually have just one kid in this generation. So perhaps could it be the reason that there's so much pressure on one child in the family? So you were also saying that there's so much pressure to be perfect or be the topper of the class, to become doctors or engineers in future. So as a youth and as a writer as well, what would be your advice for those children, for those youth who are going through such pressure right now, and also for the family, for their parents?
First of all, I think for them, I think those kids need to realize that their grades don't define them, that they're worth so much more than that, and for them to make choices for themselves actually, because I know that all of my friends, not all actually, most of my friends chose the science stream because their parents wanted them to choose science, and they want to become a doctor not because they want to, but because their parents think they should, and all of these kind of things, right? But in the end, they're the ones who are going to be living that life. They're the ones who are going to have that career, and if you're not happy with it, I don't really see the point of it. And as for parents, I think my best advice would be to not compare your children, because every child is so different from each other, and I know that all my friends are different from each other, but they're constantly compared against each other. They're always put in this competition, this race about who's going to get first, who has the higher percentage. But yeah, I think parents need to stop comparing their kids, because that really degrades their self-esteem so much.
Should we expect another book from you anytime soon?
Definitely not this year, because I am in my grade 12s and taking science, so it will be difficult. But hopefully I will be writing again next year.
And finally, as we end our program, what would be your advice for the reader of your books and our viewers?
I'd like to advise all my readers to connect with my book spiritually, I guess, in a way, so that they can truly understand each character, so that they can truly understand what each character is going through, and so that they realize that everyone is going through something. Everyone in this life is fighting a battle. Each person you meet is going through something, and each person has a story to tell. So I hope you treat everyone with kindness, you're good to everybody, and yeah, basically be a good human being.
Right, and one last question actually I wanted to ask. Is there a certain pleasure, or I interviewed some writers before, so they were saying writing kind of helps them, it's like a healing. So what is your personal view?
It's sort of therapeutic for me as well, I guess, because at the end of the day, there's so much I haven't said, that I haven't voiced out because of situations I'm in, because of social norms that I can't say out loud. So I express everything that I want to through my writing. My anger, my resentment, I guess, even my tears, everything, I express it through my writing. And at the end of the day, after I finish writing like 2,000 to 3,000 words, I feel sort of empty inside, and it's a really good feeling, because I feel like I let everything out.
That's beautiful. Will you have advice for our viewers, maybe like if they are right now going through mental issues, and if they are angry, for example, will you advise them to write it down, write like anything down, maybe paint, write, or?
For those who are going through what you said, depression or any struggle, I guess, find an art form that you love and express yourself thoroughly through it, because even if there's no one else to listen, you can always, I guess you can sort of scream through your artwork, through your writing. You can express yourself however you want to without any sort of judgment from anybody. So find an art form that you love, whether it be dance, song, art, and even writing, I guess.
That's beautiful. Tenzin, thank you very much for your time and sharing your insight with us. And for all those who loves reading, please go and grab a copy of this book, which is available in all the bookstores in Thimphu. And thank you for watching.